6 months ago, I made a video, every book I 5-starred in the first half of the year. I thought I'd do that again. I have 18 books that I gave a 5-star rating to this second half of the year, and I turned 11 of them into single book reviews. So I thought if that's a book you wanted to find out more about, I'm going to put all the videos in the notes, and you can just watch that afterwards. But we can sort of fly through them so that this video isn't ridiculously long and everybody can get out in time to, I don't know, I've started a cliche and I don't really know how to finish it. Pew by Catherine Lacey. This is the novel of somebody who goes into a church one night to sleep. We never find out if this person is old or young, man or woman, black or white. Their identity is completely neutral, but they're discovered and they don't speak. And the townsfolk around them want to know who they are and they want to know how best to help them. So they name the person Pew because they were discovered on a pew. You're wondering, well, is Pew a man? Is Pew a woman? Are they old, young? What's going on? And you are sort of assuming identities onto Pew yourself because that's just human nature. You can't really help doing it. But Catherine Lacey, the author, has not given you anything to assume any identity on Pew. So it sort of like reveals your own bias that you didn't know you had. But then the other thing that's happening is that the townsfolk are treating Pew in a certain way and they're trying to help Pew. But depending on Pew's identity, what they're doing could be seen as like really, really useful and nice, or really horrible. And it sort of shows you how the system that we live in, the charity, it really sort of assumes that you are a certain type of person. It really treats you in a certain way. It assumes that the person who needs charity will meet the person giving charity where they are. It was very thought-provoking. And the thing that I really liked about it is the more thought-provoking it got, the more emotionally nuanced it got, the more you had these ideas at who Pew might be, the more you were sort of like, oh, well, they'd feel really scared like that, or oh, they'd feel really relieved like that. A really unique book. Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer was on the Booker short list, long list. It should have been on the short list. I mean, that just points out that the judges on the Booker Prize didn't have a clue. This is the story of a young woman and her mother who is terminally ill. If you like sad books, you've got to read this book. It's just going to mess you up. And if you don't like sad books, it's still quite intelligent. It's still like talking back to literature and doing a whole lot of very clever things. Milk Teeth by Jessica Andrews. I think that this is just some of the most lovely writing I have ever seen. It's about a woman who is from the north of England. She moves to London, she moves to Paris, she moves back to London, she moves to Barcelona. She falls in love with a boy. She wants to know what her identity is. She wants to know what her identity is outside of the relationship with the boy, but she wants to still be in the relationship with the boy. And then we have this whole thing about body image coming through, about eating disorders, about times that she's gone hungry intentionally to lose weight, about how she doesn't eat enough calories. But it's told in this really cool way where every chapter is quite short and it jumps from her childhood to the present. And so everything is either the complete opposite or is the complete same. And it sort of really builds up this image of who this girl is. I just don't understand why Jessica Andrews doesn't get on the Booker Prize or the Woman's Prize. And, Saltwater was incredible. Milk Teeth, also incredible. Just the best crafted prose I've seen simply ever. Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down is, the stuff that happens in this book, wow. This is another one of these emotional tearjerkers. It's really, really sad, but I think that what is really good about this book is the emotional nuance in it. This is a book about a woman whose children are dead and she has run away so that she is not arrested. She is hiding from the cops. She's moved from Australia to America and her Facebook friend has tracked her down and realised who she is. It's really the story about how institutions fail people. She is an orphan. She has been adopted out. and we sort of go back in time and we see what her childhood was like. We won the Miles Franklin Award, which is the award for the best Australian novel. The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell is a historical fiction centred on the life of Lucrezia de Medici, who was married at 15 to a man who may or may not have killed her. It's based on a Robert Browning poem, I think it's called The Last Duchess. Everything that happens in this book, O'Farrell has done the research for. And it's not that it happened to Lucrezia Medici, but that it happened to women of that era. This is just a cool feminist historical fiction that really satisfies me, and it's Maggie O'Farrell. You know that she can write a good sentence, and you know, once you put all that together, you just got a quality book. If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, Noor Naga is a Canadian novel, but I think it's more an Egyptian novel. It is the story of an American Egyptian woman who travels to Egypt for the first time, and that's a kind of a weird thing to just like move to Egypt. So she falls in love with this man who is a bit of a cocaine addict, and they have a relationship, and that story is a little bit dark, and it explores grief and it explores power imbalance. Then it breaks the fourth wall, because that story ends, but it's not the end of the book, and you're at like a writer's group where they're discussing the book that you've just read. Everybody in this group makes incorrect assumptions about the novel, which in turn gets you to think and engage with the text in such a deep way. It felt like having like a masterclass. Like, you read a book and you like the book or you don't like the book, but then you have some sort of literature professor come along and say, well, what about this bit? And what about this bit? And you're like, oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I didn't see that. And you know, it's just the author talking about all the stuff they put in the book. Glory by No Violet Bulawayo is an African retelling of Animal Farm, except it's not. It's not, and I really hate that description of it, and I wish that I didn't say that, because that doesn't describe what it is. It's a political satire. It is incredibly funny. The events in the book are clearly taken from Robert Mugabe and Zimbabwe, but please do not think that that means this book is about Zimbabwe. That this book is about any country in the world. The reason that this book is told with animals is so that you don't associate it with Zimbabwe, so that you can see the political structures in play in more countries. This is not an individual story, in the same way that Animal Farm is not an individualized story about the Russian Revolution, and that is a really simplistic way of looking at something. And it just really upsets me that this is the narrative that I see from so many people, because it's actually about the farcical nature and the ridiculousness of people in charge and take power. And I think that it's absolutely wonderful, and I don't understand why people think that this is just the story of Robert Mugabe. Anyway, it's very, very funny. It is absolutely hilarious. It's told in a very weird style, which is not for everybody. This is the other type of book I like. I normally just like books that like make me feel sad and you know, teary books about hard topics and emotional literature, but I really do like political satire as a second genre. Speaking of those sort of books, the other type, the ones that make you feel sad, Diana Reid's Love and Virtue is one of the biggest Australian novels ever. Just plain ever. And it's out overseas now, and I don't really understand why it's not huge overseas too. I was really expecting to see a lot of love for this book. Maybe I'll end up on the Women's Prize or something. This is a story of a girl who is going to university in the inner suburbs of Sydney, and she is living on campus because she is poor and she has to. And it talks about the university sex life and how that is quite exploitatory of women, especially by men of a certain background, of a certain class. That is, people who have money, people who might end up in Canberra, which is where our parliament is, which is, you know, this is like saying in Washington if it was a US novel. It is so much more than that. It is so much more than this story of sexual assault, because it is centered on this female friendship, which is in turn both supportive and exploitatory too. It really demonstrates how you're supposed to look after somebody as a friend. And Diana Reid has been said to death over here as the Australian Sally Rooney, and it is one of these terrible things that everybody says about every young woman author who is writing emotionally dense prose about friendship and love and exploitation, and yet it somehow is exactly correct for Diana Reid. Yeah, I think that this is better than anything Sally Rooney made. And I really like Sally Rooney's novels. Puff Piece by John Safran. Oh, I've read 3 5-star Australian books. That's just a lovely little return for me. I really have discovered my love for Aussie books this year, or last year rather. It's been wonderful. John Safran is an Australian journalist who is known for his razor-sharp wit and satire. He is not a very serious man, but he is a very serious man. I think that he thinks that journalism is more effective if the recipient laughs, but I'm not really sure. Anyway, Puff Piece is his exploration of vaping and the IQOS, which is the sort of Philip Morris's half cigarette, half vaping machine, and what the health benefits are of that, and then the politics around that, and trying to get endorsed by Philip Morris to write this book, which is the most John Safran thing ever. Hi, I'm writing an expose about Philip Morris. Who will I get to sponsor it? Philip Morris. I think probably the best way to describe John Safran is he's a bit Louis Theroux. And by a bit, Louis Theroux, they're friends, and of course they are. And if Louis Theroux wrote a book about any of his, those documentaries that he made, this would be the same, but it's about corruption within the smoking world, and how that really is the same as so many different aspects. It just points out all the problems with our society in this, very, very good non-fiction book. When I Hit You by Meena Kamdasamy, or The Portrait of a Writer as a Young Wife. I mean, I don't really need to review this. You heard what the title was. That's the book. She writes it well. That's what more do you need to know? It's an excellent novel about domestic violence in India. You know from that title whether that is a book that you are not going to be able to read, or whether that is a book that you are going to definitely want to read. And she delivers what she promises. Olive Grove in Ends by Moses Mackenzie. It's got precious few views, and I really hate it that it has so few views, and it's the only book review I've done of a black male author, because I just feel like black men just get they have such a special type of racism against them, because people are scared of them, because racism comes from fear and people are scared of black men. But also, I don't think very many people have heard of this book, and that definitely attributes to the reason why book reviews on it don't get views. This is the story of a young man who is dealing drugs in a low socioeconomic area near Bristol in the United Kingdom, and how he feels trapped here, and the woman he loves, and his journey with spirituality, and how he plans to get out of this drug dealing business, and how it pulls him back in. What I think is just the best thing about this book is that when you talk about drugs and gangs, you instantly think violence, and it's obviously a huge part of this book. And whenever I read books like that, I just feel like the violence is so constant, and that is probably what it is like. But Moses Mackenzie manages to make you feel the fear of the violence, the constant threat of the violence, without focusing on it, without ever giving it a chance to glorify itself, with just being very factual and because that's not the part that he's interested in writing about. He doesn't want anybody reading this because they want to read about fighting. You know, Mackenzie wants the effect of violence on his characters shown. And I really hope that more people read this book in particular, because I just feel like all of the other books, they've had a little bit of love, and I basically love every single one of them to get more love. But like something like Maps of Our Spectacular Body, it's had love. It's, you know, you either like that book, you don't like that book, but you know about that book, right? With An Olive Grove in Ends, I don't think people know about this book, and I think that I really would like people to know about this book. Please, if you're another booktuber, please read this book and tell people. Well, that's the 11 books that I have reviews on already. On a very similar theme to An Olive Grove in Ends is Hello Mum by Bernardine Evaristo. This is a young black man's letter to his mother, and he gets involved in gang culture, and he is writing this letter to his mum explaining what it is like. A few little things that Evaristo does so well to create this relationship between mother and son in this very teenaged, I like, really love you, mum, and you're really important to me, but man, you're embarrassing and you don't understand me. The character portrait and the relationship is so good, and it just finishes with such a... Whoa. Another shorty is Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine N. Valente. This is the story of a woman who is in a relationship with a man, and everything is perfect, and she loves the relationship, and it's all so perfect, except for the basement, but we don't talk about the basement. I love how Valente genre bends. This is literary, this is feminist, this is women's fiction, this is speculative, this is fantasy, this is a little bit sci-fi, a little bit mythology, a little bit dystopian. It's a wonderful depiction of women's role in a relationship with a historical setting, and I think Valente's doing something a little bit clever here, and when you realize what it is, you're like, oh wow. Okay, 5 books that I haven't already discussed. Let's talk about Putney by Sofka that is a very hard last name to pronounce. Yeah, this is the story of a woman who at 50 meets her childhood best friend again, and they start to talk about this man who is a famous director and the woman's relationship with that director when she was 13. The woman in question has a daughter. What is really interesting is how this woman has accepted the relationship she had with this man when she was very young as something completely normal, and, you know, she says some of the most horrible cliches like, he's a good guy, he just fell in love with a child. Throughout this novel, she realizes that that's not true, and it's her own daughter being 13 that sort of brings that home for her when her daughter is of the same age, and she like does a dance that she sees on a music video. She's like, you know, in some ways she's such a woman, and in other ways she's such a child. She's not 13, she's like 6 and 18 at the same time. And I thought that was such a wonderful way of describing a 13-year-old, because they get individual parts of them that become grown-ups one at a time, rather than like this slow progression to being almost a grown-up. I just thought that was such a clever way of looking at that. But anyway, this book is this exploration of these relationships. It is done in a way that allows discussion and thought, but in no way glorifies what's going on, in no way says, yeah, relationships with children are acceptable in any way. Like, there is no exception to that. Relationships with children are bad. This is a topic that has been done a little bit, and it is often done terribly, and this is one of these books that does not do it terribly. And just how it traumatizes and how it doesn't allow healing. I think that this is a very well researched book too. I want to say that this is a much lighter book. I wouldn't call it a light book, but The Wonder by Emma Donoghue, I think that this is just a fantastic example of great storytelling. The Wonder is the story of a young Irish woman, girl child, who doesn't eat. And they hire this nurse to come look after this girl. And she's sort of like, well, I'll figure it out. I'll figure out what's going on. So all you're trying to do is figure out how this girl is eating. Is it a miracle? What's going on? But then there are questions around motherhood and parenting and love, and there is quite a bit that happens in this book. It's actually quite dark. I would just say, like, check all trigger warnings for all books I review, because but yeah, this is just such wonderful storytelling. This is how you build suspense and intrigue, and you keep somebody invested in your characters. Brilliant, like, very well done. Factory Girls by Michelle Gallen. It's set on the border of Ireland and Northern Ireland during the final few months of the Troubles, and it follows three best friends who have just finished year 12, and they dream of going to university, of going to England and get educated to have some sort of future. But while they wait for their results, they get a job at a local factory making shirts. It's just such a wonderful portrait of three women at this stage of life, at this stage of exploring their sexual identity, as their life opens up in front of them, as their future is sort of revealed, as they're earning some money for the first time. And then all of this happens in the backdrop of the Troubles. There are just things that these women take for normal that are not normal. They're like, the Irish soldiers point the gun at you as a way of saying hi, and they track you with it. The English soldiers would never do that. They prefer a moving target. Man, that's creepy. Cavalier disrespect for life and safety that these girls think of as normal, in with this, like, really fundamental coming of age time when they're discovering sex and money and independence and all of the things that you discover when you are at that age. It's just good literature. It's just good literature. You've got everything that you need. You've got fantastic characters, great relationships, eerie setting. You're saying something quite feminist. You're saying something quite historically profound. You're teaching people stuff about a generation. I really enjoyed this book. I think that this is absolutely wonderful. Another book that I think is absolutely wonderful is Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkinson. A mother is dead, and she has written a letter to her two children detailing her life. But it isn't her life, and it's a real mystery as to what's going on. Now, this is a Caribbean novel, but it's also an American novel, and it's also a British novel. And I think that that's cool, because we get to see this woman, grew up on the island, which I think is a representation of Jamaica, and then she moves to England, and then eventually she moves to North America. It's very feminist, and it's very seeing of black women in particular, but she has lived this truly remarkable life, and kind of like looking at it now, it's almost ridiculous, but it's really well done, and you sort of see how, like, one thing leads to another, and it's not really ridiculous at all. I don't want to spoil anything with this book, because all of the themes are a plot point, but these are really big issues when it comes to being a woman and a family and identity and who you are. And this novel just puts everything together so well. It's just one of these novels where halfway through it you realise that it doesn't really matter what this author is writing, that they've just got the ability to pull it off because they know how to tell a story, they know how to write a sentence, and they know how to build a character, and it's going to be good. That it has a plot, like, it's just what I like in literature. It's wonderful. It talks about racism. It contrasts the racism in Jamaica, in the United Kingdom, and in North America in such a cool way. Like, you can really see the societal differences and how these people, how Caribbean people are disadvantaged in all societies, really, but like they get the choice of how they're going to be disadvantaged, which is yay. And it's also a love story. It's got queer representation in it. It's just got everything in it, and I'm so shocked that this book hasn't taken off and done more. I just, wow. I don't know how to get you to read it without telling you spoilers, and I don't want to do that. I just trust me that this is just what literature should look like. Lastly, I want to leave you with a book that made a real impression with me. Camilla Shamsi's novel Home Fire. This won the Women's Prize a few years ago, and it is the story of terrorism, and it is a love story between two Pakistani British people, and it is set at a time where there is a lot of Islamophobia in Britain, which really sounds like it could be any time, but particularly of heightened Islamophobia in regards to terrorist attacks. There's a love story, there's terrorist attacks, there's politics all in this, but there is something that really elevates this book to something really, really special, and that is, why would a young man join Al-Qaeda? Why would that happen? It's such a hard thing to empathize with. It's such a hard thing to understand. Why would a young man join a terrorist group? Because, like, I get people being angry at society and angry at our leaders, and, you know, like, let's face it, we've got some pretty terrible leaders in the world right now. We got elections where we've got bad choice and worse choice, and we've got people that are not doing the right thing. So I get being angry at leaders. I get wishing them harm, but to join a terrorist organization, I mean, maybe my life is too comfortable. To get you to understand how these men are radicalized and to see the humanity in these people. And I mean, if we want to stop people being radicalized and becoming terrorists, what we need to do is understand why they are becoming terrorists. What we need to do is understand them. Right? We can't just like say, well, we'll spend more money on the military, on the police, because that doesn't actually work. We need to understand why they do that and what we can do to prevent it. Camilla Shamsi understands and explains it to you, and it's horrible. I'm forever going to be grateful for that knowledge. It's just something that I really don't think many authors could have pulled this off. It's such a special scene when it happens, and it is absolutely revolting and it is absolutely horrible, but that's why you read this book. Everything else about this book is great. Like let's like, it's a good book otherwise, but sometimes it's a little scene that elevates a book from a good book to just an outstanding book, and I think Camilla Shamsi's Home Fire is an outstanding book that everybody should read. I mentioned Meena Kandasami's novel When I Hit You before, and that was shortlisted for the Women's Prize the year that Home Fire won it. That is a book that delivers on what it promises, and you would just think that that book should just have won the Women's Prize after you read it, and you know, you just like, that is an incredible book. And then you read Home Fire and you understand that tough year, and I think I agree with the judges that Home Fire should have won, but geez, tough on Meena Kandasamy. She could have been a year earlier or a year later, couldn't she? That's the 18 books that I've given 5 stars to in the second half of this year. I hope that you managed to find at least one book in these 18. Some absolutely wonderful books for you in there, and I'm sure you'll be able to get a couple of great ones from this list. Bye bye.